velocidad, por favor?
Diga 320.
Es correcto. Tenemos todos los motores cortados y está acelerando y acelerando.
All engines cut, and it's accelerating. These are the words of a very confused pilot. Their plane is showing the flight crew contradicting an unbelievable airspeed and altitude readings. The flight crew will find themselves in disagreement on what their aircraft is trying to tell them as contradicting warnings begin to mount. 15 minutes earlier, Aeroperu Flight 603 took off from Lima Airport on a nighttime flight to Santiago, Chile, a flight of 3.5 hours. The Boeing 757 was carrying 70 passengers and crew when it crashed into the Pacific Ocean, killing all on board. The cause of the plane's erratic readings and subsequent crash into the ocean would be found in an unbelievable case of maintenance error. Peruvian airline Aeroperu had served as the national airline of Peru from 1973. In 1994, the airline began operating the highly sophisticated Boeing 757, a state-of-the-art plane of its day. The Boeing 757 in the 1990s was one of the most popular planes in the skies. With over 1,000 of the planes built, the 757 saw a 23-year-long production run ending in 2004. Aeroperu would operate two 757s during its time of operation. The Boeing 757 registered as November 52 Alpha Whiskey had been transferred from Aeromexico to Aeroperu and had been scheduled to make a trip between Lima and Santiago, Chile. This leg was part of a much longer route which originated in Miami with intermediate stops in Quito and Lima. The accident of Flight 603 would occur on the final leg, which would take place in the early hours of the morning on October 2, 1996. While many passengers on the full route disembarked at Lima, the remaining passengers were transferred to the accident plane, November 52 Alpha Whiskey. This plane had some maintenance work carried out before the flight to Santiago. This maintenance included the replacing of two engine fan blades in the right side engine, which had been damaged from avian ingestion. The hydraulic pump in this engine was also repaired. Before the plane left the gate, the plane was polished on the front underside of the fuselage. For this process, it was standard procedure to cover the sensitive pitostatic ports with masking tape. This covering the pitot tubes with tape was a protective measure to prevent the inside of the tubes from becoming obstructed with polishing materials. A plane's pitot tubes are a highly sensitive part of any aircraft. They provide airspeed and altitude information to pilots by acting as a sort of wind tunnel, taking measurements of air pressure and calculating an indicated airspeed. The plane's modern and sophisticated flight computer requires airspeed and altitude parameters in order to perform basic functions. There are often multiple sets of pitot tubing on modern airliners, and on this occasion, the left side pitot tubes were covered in tape. This tape would not be removed from the aircraft. It would simply be missed by those polishing the outside skin of the plane and other maintenance staff. It would also be missed by the flight crew during the walk-around steps. This one piece of tape, put in place to supposedly prevent the blockage of the tubing from foreign objects and fluids, would become an obstruction in and of itself once the plane takes off into the night. At the time, in 1996, it should be noted that there was a recent case of a pitot blockage being a contributing factor to the loss of a 757 that very year. On February 6, 1996, Bergen Air Flight 301 crashed off the coast of the Dominican Republic just minutes after takeoff. In that case, the pitot tubing was believed to be blocked by an insect nest. We already have a video on this incident if you want to learn more. At 12:42 a.m. local time in the very early morning of October 2, 1996, Aeroperu Flight 603 was cleared for takeoff on runway 15 departing south. On the flight deck is 58-year-old Captain Eric Schreiber Ladron de Guevara and 42-year-old First Officer David Fernandez Reveredo. In the cabin are 61 passengers and 7 further crew members, for a total of 70 people on board the lightly filled plane. What is interesting to note about this accident is that the full 30-minute cockpit voice recording from takeoff to impact with the ocean is publicly available. This is your content warning for a cockpit voice recording, as what you are about to hear is the recorded conversation between the two pilots on takeoff.
Aeroperu 603, soy atenuación de ruido, viento calma, está autorizado a despegar pista 15.
P1, rotate. P2. Oscillate. Exacto,
Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear.
Immediately after takeoff, the pilots noticed that their altimeters appeared to have failed. In actuality, the altimeters, along with the airspeed indicator, could not function correctly because of the blockage of the crucial pitot tubing, induced by the tape which was not removed from the plane during its maintenance on the ground. What follows in the cockpit is mounting confusion. As the pilots are now distracted by their instruments, the departure handoff goes unanswered on the first transmission. During this time, the Boeing 757 begins to fly away from Lima, heading southwest out over the Pacific Ocean, leaving the lights of the Peruvian coast behind. In just minutes after takeoff, with the instruments now inaccurate, the pilots do not have a clear reference of a horizon or visual contact with the ocean. Outside is total darkness. As people on the ground who often live in cities or well-lit areas, even in developing countries, we can forget that during the night, we are on the dark side of the planet. In the sky and over an area with absolutely no ground lighting such as an ocean, there is no distinguishing between what is sky and what is water. On Flight 603, erratic altitude readings alarmed the pilots as it was indicated that the plane was going down. In another instance, the altimeter on the captain's side appeared to read 0, although the plane was obviously still flying. 5 minutes after leaving Lima, the flight crew declare an emergency, and air traffic control asks the pilots to switch frequencies to receive radar assistance.
La velocidad, vamos a instrumentos básicos. Se ha ido todo a la mierda. Torre, Aeroperu 603. Estamos en emergencia. Torre, Aeroperu 603.
Aeroperu 603, torre, prosiga.
Declaramos emergencia, no tenemos instrumentos básicos, ni altímetro, ni velocímetro. Declaramos emergencia.
Recibido, altitud.
No tenemos, tenemos hasta 1000 pies, aproximadamente.
10 pies, recibido, Aeroperu 603. Confirme si es posible cambiar frecuencia 119,7 a fin de recibir.
Pasamos a 19.7.
Ahora se han desconectado.
Disagreements about what the plane is telling the pilots can be heard on the recording, along with a comment from the co-pilot about maintenance staff potentially tampering with the plane. Seemingly unrelated warnings had also begun to sound, notably a rudder ratio and max speed trim warning. Rudder ratio is a warning normally in relation to how much yaw a plane needs in flight. The computerized system needs additional information which it currently is not getting from the plane. The first officer asked for a return to Lima and vectors for ILS back onto runway 15.
Sí, solicitamos que nos vectoree para ILS piso 5. Todavía no, vamos a estabilizar.
Se le sigue por la derecha rumbo 330.
Si le saca derecha rumbo 330.
Afirmativo, y mantenga la presente altitud.
Altitud no podemos. ¿Qué nivel tenemos? tenemos 4.000 pies, a ver si nos confirma.
Correcto, mantiene 4.000.
Tenemos 4.000.
Afirmativo.
Here, it should be noted that while yes, the air traffic controller does have the aircraft flying at 4,000 feet on their radar screen, this information is fed to the controller's radar by the plane's transponder. Without accurate readings from the plane, this transponder altitude reading was also faulty. In fact, altitude readings from the transponder would be faulty for the entire flight. The flight crew did not know this and would, on multiple occasions, ask for the faulty altitude information from the ground. 1 minute later, ATC would give an update on the plane's position. From the controller's perspective, it appeared that the plane had climbed and would continue to climb to around 10,000 feet. Flight 603 was now 22 miles southwest of Lima. The aircraft's indicated altitude of 10,000 was not anywhere close to correct, as the plane would now, on average, descend lower and lower. Due to the total darkness outside, those in the cabin would be none the wiser to the unfolding chaos on the flight deck. Currently still flying away from the airport, the plane begins a turn to the right, heading north.
Su distancia es 30 millas. Desea rumbo para proceder hacia el localizado, ¿correcto?
No, todavía vamos a resolver.
A la derecha con rumbo 350, se le sugiere.
Quita los autopilots. Están fuera los autopilots. Ya, sí.
What follows is a disagreement on the status of the autopilot, but the flight crew would agree that the autothrottle was not working.
Ya, sigue leyendo.
Nada más, lo único que he hecho es
Los autopilots están puestos.
No están puestos.
Sí, están puestos.
No están apagados. ¿Quieres el auto?
A ver, desconectamos.
Uno, marcha en el comando.
Ya, comando. Ya. Flap up. Ya.
Flap up.
Dos. Ajá.
Ahora sí,
Ahora sí.
Senta el autopilot.
Ya.
Vamos a poner esto.
Quítame la velocidad.
Ya,
Acá.
senta el autopilot.
Sigue trepando.
No hay otro trote.
No hay otro trote. Autopilot 2.
La velocidad.
A 220 vamos a mantener manual. ¿Por qué no desconectan los autos?
¿Quieres desconectarlo?
Claro.
Está desconectado, fly directo, nada más. Fly directo arriba.
Now flying parallel to the airport runway at Lima, Flight 603 was now 40 miles from the airport. The flight crew requested vectors for ILS on runway 15. The tower would give the flight crew a set of instructions, including a course to intercept the localizer and clearance to descend down to 4,000 feet. Bear in mind, the altitude readings from both the plane and the tower are incorrect, and neither have any idea on what the plane's actual altitude is. The first officer handling radio communication requested further guidance 30 miles north of the airport. Confusion would escalate further, as after confirming indicated airspeed from the ground, the pilots can see that the plane's erratic readings show an accelerating speed even though the engines are powered down. The indicated speed showed the plane passing 320 knots. This reading was incorrect, but this indicated speed prompted the overspeed warning to sound in the cockpit.
¿Se indica la velocidad, por favor?
Diga 320.
Correcto. Tenemos todos los motores cortados y está acelerando y acelerando.
Ok, recibido.
Está la velocidad bien, los tres indicadores están bien en velocidad. Fast. Overspeed. Exacto,
Warning. No puede ser, pues. Ready Recho nada más, y hay Ready Recho no hay ni desconectan.
Todos están bien.
¿Cuál será la velocidad real?
This overspeed warning prompted the captain to extend the speed brakes on the wings. The controller would inform the crew of passing perpendicular to the airport after passing the 260 outbound radial from the airport's VOR. Even though the tower would recommend Flight 603 to make a right turn from their position, in the final 10 minutes of the flight, the plane would actually head west, before turning back, heading east towards the airport. The time was now just before 1 a.m. The overspeed warning heard here would now play until impact with the ocean. This would also be quickly followed up by the stick shaker stall warning.
Todo se ha ido, todos los instrumentos se han ido a la mierda. ¿Ah?
These are two highly conflicting warnings. Overspeed warning the pilots are flying too fast, and the stall warning alerting the pilots that they are flying too slowly. First Officer Fernandez believes that his instruments are working and exclaims that "we are going down," and that they were not overspeeding. The first officer radioed out a request to have a rescue plane guide them back to the airport. The details were passed on from the tower to arrange to have a Boeing 707 take off and guide the plane back to Lima. From this point, the pilots were told that the rescue plane would be ready in 15 minutes. The flight crew were in total disagreement on what was happening to the plane, the captain expressing disapproval of the initial rescue call.
¿Hay algún avión que pueda salir a rescate de nosotros?
Espérate, no.
Sí, correcto, vamos a coordinar de inmediato. Está coordinando de inmediato.
¿Un avión que nos pueda servir de guía, algún Aeroperu que esté por ahí, algo?
No le digas nada a eso.
Sí, porque ahorita estamos en PC.
Atiende, tenemos un 707 que va a salir para pura web y le está avisando.
Es ficticio.
No, si tenemos cheque, ¿cómo no va a estar?
Checa, pero es... con speed rate y todo. Estamos manteniendo 9.500 pies. ¿Por qué no da la misma? Pues no entiendo. La potencia, ¿cuánto tenemos de potencia?
195, 42 N1.
Air data. ¿Tú has cambiado el air data? Suelta tu air data.
Here, the captain is looking around to figure out what instruments are actually working. He would also correctly note that he believes that the pitos have faulted. The plane now had begun turning west, flying away from Lima again.
Todo el pitot se ha ido, el air data se ha ido a la mierda.
Aeroperu 603, su base está informando si sus dos sistemas de computadoras están fuera de servicio.
Tenemos ningún instrumento funciona de velocímetro, tenemos alarma de alta velocidad y no, aparentemente no.
Minutes later, the tower would update the flight crew on the status of the rescue plane. During this transmission, the ground proximity warning system sounds on the flight deck. This alert warns the pilots of flying dangerously close to the ground, or in this case, ocean. Unlike other warnings on the flight deck, the GPWS was telling the flight crew the reality of the situation. However, given the nature of the crisis on board, the pilots, especially the captain, had suspicions on the validity of this warning. This was not helped by the fact that the controller would again read back faulty altitude data, stating an altitude of 10,000 feet. In reality, the plane was less than 1,000 feet above the ocean.
El 707 estaría listo para 6 minutos para proceder a su ayuda.
Too low terrain. 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 Too low terrain.
Alarma de terreno.
Too low terrain.
Alarma de terreno.
Too low terrain.
Según el monitor de indicamos el 100 volando con rumbo
Too
hacia el
low terrain.
noroeste.
Too low terrain. Too low terrain. Too low terrain. Too low terrain.
Según el monitor de indicamos 105.
Wind shear. Wind shear. Wind shear.
Aeroperu Flight 603 continued to fly west, having now passed 50 miles from the airport. The pilots would continue to troubleshoot problems with the plane as they turned back to the east. The pilots expressing that they wished to try and intercept the ILS. By this point, the rescue plane had been prepared and was readying for takeoff imminently. Several minutes later, the ground proximity warning system sounds again on the flight deck. In the following moments, The pilots would try to verify their altitude, to which ATC exclaims the faulty reading of 9,700 feet. The plane was in fact not anywhere near 9,700, but rather mere dozens of feet above the ocean. Moments later, the initial impact with the water can be heard on the cockpit voice recorder.
Too low terrain. 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 Too low terrain.
¿Qué hacemos con el tren? No sabes qué ver. Estamos impactando en agua. Dale, perdida.
In this moment, we need to pause and understand the forces that were now being exerted onto the plane at this time. The left wingtip and left engine struck the water. An immense amount of drag was now being pulled on these parts of the aircraft. Because of this drag, the right side of the plane was now traveling faster than the left side, creating an intense yaw effect. It is absolutely possible that in this moment, passengers in the cabin may have noticed that something was wrong, as this force would have been extremely noticeable. For 17 seconds, the pilots would struggle to control their plane.
Too low terrain. Too low terrain.
¿Qué hacemos con el tren? No sabes qué ver. Estamos impactando en agua. Dale, perdida.
Too low terrain. 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 Too low terrain.
Nos vamos a invertir.
Boom.
In their efforts to save their plane, the Boeing 757 inverted where in mere seconds it impacted the water upside down, obliterating the aircraft instantly. This led to the deaths of all 70 people on board. The subsequent investigation concluded that Captain Eric Schreiber Ladron de Guevara, quote, made a series of errors and omissions which generated factors liable to lead to the accident. Blame was also directed to ground staff who had taped over the pitot tubes and not performed their job correctly in removing the tape. The flight crew would also be criticized for failing to pick up on the tape during their walkaround. It should be noted that the accident pilots had faced a situation they had not been trained for. Going forward, flight training and aircraft manuals were to be updated and highlighted to flight crews, especially highlighted on the Boeing 757, as this was the second accident that year to involve an incident with obstructions to the pitot tubing. The previously mentioned Bergen Air incident would also be referenced in the investigation report. It would not be the last time that pitot tube obstructions would claim lives on aircraft. In 2009, Air France Flight 447 crashed in the Atlantic Ocean. Pilot error played a critical role in that incident. For more information, we already have videos on both the Bergen Air and Air France incidents. A very good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for making it to the end of what has been the longest video on the channel thus far. I knew that the full-length CVR recording was available and wanted to make use of it for this video, which I've been meaning to do for quite a while actually. If you found this video interesting, be sure to subscribe as there is a new video every Saturday. This video also went out to my patrons over on Patreon 48 hours before it went out publicly on YouTube. Speaking of which, it is time to thank my patrons for their continuous support. The Patreon has been running now for nearly 8 months, so a big thank you to everyone who has pledged. If you would like to get your name featured or read out at the end of the next video, along with getting early access to new videos, you can join the Disaster Breakdown Patreon from £3 per month, and the link to that will be in the pinned comment below. Thank you to my £5 tier patrons, Aidan Montgomery, Derek Bean, Hector Palmer-Tellers, Ken Zachman, Kevin Connors, Christy, Leon San Jennings, Marie Ennis, MG, Pac-Man7, Panic Chicken, Saria Melody, So FP, and Sue Shoes. Still a very interesting name. A big thank you to my generous £10 tier patrons, Alex, who is a new joiner, Alex Keller, Ann Sid, Daniel Hendricks, D. Rogers, Mike Milton, Side Effect, Robert Hamilton, Roger Mayer, and Where Are My Cheetos? Thank you all so much. And that is it for me this week. It's been a pretty big one. Have a good weekend, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.